welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us here. Like I said, we're just getting started. I kind of sound like a broken record, but we are in it for the long haul tonight. There in New Hampshire, we just spoke with John Hook there in Nashua. We just spoke with Craig Patrick there in Florida as well. They offer such great insight and reporting about where the race stands. This is the first in the nation primary. Of course, last Monday was the first in the nation caucus, but New Hampshire really prides itself on that vaunted role in the nominating calendar every 4 years. I want to put this up too, because remember, this is not only a race between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, it's a race for delegates to the convention this summer. This is where the delegate count stands right now after Iowa. Trump with 20, Haley with 8. There were 40 delegates at play in Iowa. There's 22 tonight in New Hampshire. I might add, though, that because DeSantis came in second in Iowa, he got one more delegate than Haley there. Of course, DeSantis no longer in the equation as of last Sunday. In the meantime here, we're going to bring into the conversation our friends, political analysts and experts, Katie Wanenberg and Brian Sobel, and they join me. You guys, thanks for being with us here. I know you were with us during the Iowa caucuses. Well, it's now New Hampshire. This is moving quite rapidly here. A lot has happened since Iowa as well. Katie, I'm going to start with you first. A lot of the attacks against Nikki Haley between Iowa and New Hampshire among some of these more MAGA-style conservatives has been that she's a liberal, just like Gavin Newsom, just like Hillary Clinton. Is that sticking with voters there in New Hampshire, some of whom may be more independently minded? Does that have traction, do you think, today?
I mean, it's almost laughable, Andrew, to call Nikki Haley a Democrat or a moderate, and actually even a moderate. I mean, this is a woman who served as governor of South Carolina, very conservative state, very conservative track record. Just in the last couple of days, she's actually made the point related to the legislation that she signed into law as governor of South Carolina on the issue of abortion, that she is more conservative than Donald Trump. And so I don't think it's landing. I think it's, the great fear. I think where most of those hits are really truly coming from is we have been seeing in polling over the last couple of weeks since Nikki Haley, I do think, has popped up more, is that she is pulling from a moderate base. She's pulling from that base that I think is a never Trumper, or perhaps is more socially moderate, fiscally conservative, can't take or swallow a Donald Trump on the ballot. But I do think it's laughable, and I think she can hit back pretty quickly with her record as governor of South Carolina.
Brian, to that point, you and I were talking as well yesterday about how the makeup of the primary electorate there in Iowa and in New Hampshire, and even with South Carolina, they're all just so different. I mean, Iowa and South Carolina are much more similar than, the New Hampshire primary electorate as well. And independents, they can decide which primary they want to vote in today. They can go to the Democratic side. They can go to the Republican side. So the nature of the primary in this particular state is so different. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage to Nikki Haley? What does Nikki Haley need to do to kind of, take advantage of that reality on the ground there in New Hampshire?
Well, first of all, I think to contrast Iowa and New Hampshire as very different places, all you need to do is look at a very recent poll that identified that 46% of the Republican voters in Iowa identified as MAGA. In contrast, 32% in New Hampshire identify as MAGA. So to Katie's point and to the general idea that Nikki Haley is hoping to pull a lot of people away from leaning Trump to leaning against Trump because he may not be electable is really a question tonight. And that's what we're going to be watching. If Haley has a very good night, and I think that's within striking distance of Donald Trump, I think she's got momentum. And as we've talked about before, momentum is everything.
Momentum is everything. Money is everything, too, though. And Katie, let's talk about that. I mean, Nikki Haley, she earned and raised $1.5 million after the DeSantis dropping out there. When campaigns go, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. And correct me if I'm wrong there. Does she have the money to sustain this to Super Tuesday, do you think? Notwithstanding what happens tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I we know that she's headed to Wall Street, I believe tomorrow for a fundraiser. I think her showing, to the point that Brian just made really matters. I know one of your analysts said, the Haley campaign is trying to put some, pressure. Oh, if it's within 10 points. I mean, I do think the margin of error is going to be really important, and how does that play out with the overall voter turnout? The one thing that I don't think people really spent a lot of time on coming out of Iowa because we transitioned so quickly to New Hampshire is, we did see a depressed voter turnout in the caucus in Iowa. 150,000 Republican voters out of the 900,000 that were eligible to vote in the caucus. I mean, I think some of that stuff is important for those who are looking for a candidate that is not Donald Trump. And so, the margin in which she wins or loses tonight. So you never know what can happen. We've seen
Right.
some crazier things happen in New Hampshire. I do think matters. I think the money matters, and she actually has raised a lot of money. And yes, 1,500,000, which I feel really weird saying isn't that much money when you're talking about going into Super Tuesday. Money begets money, and so I think she's going to really be looking to see who is going to put more backing into her campaign if she is able to keep things tight today or win it.
Yeah, I want to talk about turnout too, because, we spoke last week to the Iowa Republican Party chairman, Jeff Kaufman. He was predicting, really good turnout despite the frigid temperatures. It was nowhere near the record in 2016. Also, the New Hampshire Secretary of State's office tells Fox's Brian Yennis about the turnout question that they can confidently say voter turnout is very strong and is so far on track to meet the predicted record voter turnout. They added, it'll be interesting to see how close that prediction got. They estimated a record high 322,000 voter turnout for a Republican primary. Brian, when you talk about turnout in a primary, is that any indication or bellwether for turnout when it comes to a general election? Are they, I guess, the same side of the same coin, if you will, Brian?
Well, it's a good question, but we can predict now that across the nation there's going to be strong turnout in November. And so, what we learned tonight in New Hampshire will be a precursor for further primaries and for the November election. Uh, that is, and this is a caveat, that is if the American public decides that a race between a particular Republican and perhaps the incumbent president, Joe Biden, unless something else goes on, is a race they want to be involved in. And the X factor is how many people are not interested in seeing the race between Donald Trump and President Biden. And because of that, there will be defections. People will maybe go in a different direction. They may go independent. They may not vote for a president. They may decide to vote for a candidate who is not of their own party registration because they think they can affect things. There's a lot at play here, and it's so early. But maybe we'll talk about the importance beyond New Hampshire, really, of South Carolina, because I
Yeah,
think South Carolina is where Nikki Haley has to make her stand.
yeah. What about Donald Trump? I mean, what's his final message tonight? He has treated this primary process, and we can argue whether or not that was wise or prudent or strategic, not participating in the RNC primary debates. Not really getting on the campaign trail until the very last week in places like Iowa, places like New Hampshire. What's his closing message there in New Hampshire? And I guess overall, what is the theme of the Trump 2024 campaign? Katie, you first.
Yeah, the one thing that I think we're not paying attention to or we're not seeing as much as I think voters are is I actually think the Trump campaign is running a disciplined campaign when it's absent of Trump. I think they're doubling down on the economic messaging. Just I did notice in Iowa, his backdrops were, what a mortgage under his administration was versus the Biden administration. The campaign has done a ton of work on inflation. The whole thing around Thanksgiving about what a turkey dinner cost 4 years ago versus now. I think that economic messaging is really disciplined. I think the campaign is, staying strong on it. The one thing is we are seeing economic data that is showing that feeling is starting to change. And so what happens when perhaps the one thing that they have been able to be really disciplined about starts to slip and go against them? I don't think Donald Trump himself has a message besides like, I'm leading in all the polls. Vote for me. I'm a winner. Like I think that's his message. And so I think really the campaign is different from the person, and we're seeing that play out. And I think we're seeing it play out because he hasn't actually shown up on the campaign trail all that much either, too.
Yeah. And maybe that is part of the strategic advantage that the Trump campaign has seen, to not
Yeah.
really remind people of Donald Trump, 2016 to 2020, what have you. Brian, I want to ask you about let's look past New Hampshire if we can here. Is it premature to even have the discussion of the Trump Veep stakes? Is it premature to refer to Trump as the presumptive nominee? Or, will this question I'm asking you be kind of inoperative after tonight, do you think? Should we be having those conversations, reporters, about where the race is going and what the race looks like, even before New Hampshire is called tonight? Brian.
Well, I would say no, but then I wouldn't be a realist about
Okay.
how we view things, which is speculation, which is deciding races before they've occurred. All the things we tend to do in the media are at play here, and so the Veep stakes and all these other things come into play. But I would suggest that within the Haley camp, they aren't viewing it this way. And to your earlier question, Andrew, about what is Donald Trump running on? Donald Trump, in my view, somewhat to Katie's point, is I'm Donald Trump. Vote for me. And whether the campaign's messaging is effective, obviously it is one thing, but curtailing their candidate is another thing. I said over and over in the media in 2020 that had Donald Trump just gotten off Twitter at that time for the 6 months leading up to the election, he would have been elected. But he has this insatiable appetite for commenting, and I don't think he's disciplined. His campaign is disciplined, but he lacks the discipline sometimes to just stay on message, which is difficult.
Can I just hop in, Andrew, on
Yes,
the whole
please.
point of the Veep and speculation? I totally agree with Brian. Like we love to speculate. I,
Right.
I personally think, depending on what happens tonight, I unfortunately think Haley is going to run into the South Carolina brick wall,
Uh,
and historically, no presidential candidate has won the nomination without winning their home state, and right now, South Carolina does not look strong for Haley. As it relates to the vice president, I don't think Donald Trump is incentivized whatsoever to pick a vice presidential candidate until maybe the convention, like maybe he's
oh,
gonna do something crazy and just keep everyone out there kissing the ring, stumbling over themselves to like one up each other in this race. And I think Donald Trump is gonna enjoy it. It's gonna be like his version of The Apprentice, and it's gonna be great television for all of us who wish life was, a game show, but really isn't. But I don't see Donald Trump making any decisions anytime soon, only because I think he is going to personally enjoy seeing how far people stoop to make them a contender for the vice presidency.
no, that's so
Totally agree
interesting.
with that. And the comment by Trump that I already know who the vice president will be is just to that point. He's got all these people who you can speculate about, including Huckabee Sanders
Right.
and a whole bunch of other people. But Donald Trump's going to play this out for a while because
Yeah.
it's all part of the show.
Yeah. We are still so early in the nominating calendar. And, since we last spoke last Monday night for Iowa, I mean, were you guys surprised how fast the race winnowed and coalesced around Donald Trump? It was almost like split second because I was kind of comparing it to 2020 and the Democratic presidential primary contest when there were, everyone and their brother was running for president back at the time on the Democratic side. And then everyone coalesced after Super Tuesday around Joe Biden eventually, but that was not till March. I mean, we were 1 week into the calendar here and everyone was coalescing around Trump. Did that surprise you or not, Katie?
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think unfortunately, I mean, I just looked it up just to confirm I could say this. I mean, you have Donald Trump in the high 60s, you have Nikki Haley in the mid teens. Like I give her a lot of credit. And, I think all of us also recognize that this is a pretty big audition for 2028. I think she has a message. I think her national security, her foreign, foreign affairs expertise is actually something really important for voters to consider at this moment in time. But you know, I frankly, I think it will be hard for her to stay in this race after tomorrow, and it's not shocking to me whatsoever. And I think all of us on the outside, I don't think would be surprised if she dropped out based on her showing, unless she wins. But then I think that the reality is, I think we're at February 3rd for South Carolina, you know, things don't look good there. And then the momentum, I think, is really lost, to Brian's point earlier.
Yeah, and Brian, maybe this is just politics, and we have a lot of really, big politics viewers who follow this so closely. But then for those who don't, who are watching right now as we get these results in from New Hampshire, how do they make sense of someone like DeSantis or Burgum or Ramaswamy, drop out of the race and in the very same breath endorse who was their primary challenger? How do they grapple with that? Is it just politics, Brian?
It's politics. I think it's real life. I think
Yeah.
it's people saying, "Hey, I'm gonna bet on the person I think is going to be the winner." I think, frankly, some of these individuals have been promised opportunities in the new President Trump administration, if that's the case. So much of this goes on behind the scenes. Anybody who's been around this for a lot of years understands that there are countless phone calls that go on behind the scenes. And so I was not surprised by DeSantis dropping out. He was fading quickly. But I really thought he'd wait a couple of days before he threw his support behind Trump, because Trump hasn't treated any of these potential candidates very well. The weekend before Ramaswamy dropped out, Trump just beat him with a club on the circuit, that weekend, and all of a sudden Ramaswamy's, saying, "Hey, I'm behind Trump." The same thing is true for DeSantis. The same thing would be true for Nikki Haley.
Right.
And so, but Nikki Haley has mettle. I mean, she has said over and over again, "I'm in for the long fight." She would have to walk that back with some reasoning. But we've said it, and I think it's true. If she does well tonight, she's got to do very well in South Carolina. Although, honestly, if she came close in South Carolina, yeah, I understand the history of it.
Sure.
But she could say, "Hey, I've got momentum now. I'm moving on this person."
Yeah. Her main
Yeah, I don't
message
disagree.
seems to be
Oh,
that.
sorry, Andrew, I don't disagree with that, Brian. Like, I think she has to be within striking distance in South Carolina.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and her main message overall is that Americans want an alternative. They want a choice. They're crying out for one. That she's seen the polling internally and externally that Americans don't want a Trump Biden 2.0 rematch. Katie Wanenberg, Brian Sobel, we got to leave it at that. We can't thank you enough. Thanks so much.
We'll see you soon.
Waiting
Andrew.
for the results tonight. Have a good
Yes.
one.
Thank